Hello and welcome to the first segment of the Environmental Justice Podcast, where we dive deeper into the social constructs that affect both us and our environment. In this episode, we will be discussing how different religions and cultures have influenced and will continue to influence decisions that are made regarding environmental justice. My name is Zoe, and I am joined by Kenya, Kaycie, and Dom.
To start this episode off, one important thing to ask is, what is environmental justice?
Bunyan I. Bryant Jr., a professor from the University of Michigan, defines environmental justice as both a field of study and a social movement that seeks to address the unequal distribution of environmental benefits and harms, and asks whether procedures and impacts of environmental decision-making are fair to the people they affect.
It's important to remember that environmental justice is an issue that impacts all types of people, but has a substantial effect on the African American, Latino, and Indigenous communities.
The increased impact of environmental justices on minorities is largely because of racism or prejudice towards certain groups of people, which impacts the decision-making of the political and environmental officials in charge of mitigating issues that become environmental injustices.
Next, we will be diving into historical events. These are important events and examples of environmental justice that contributed to the shaping of the movement that deals with modern examples of injustice.
The first of our historical events is the Memphis sanitation workers' strike of 1986. This strike occurred when two colored men were crushed in trash compactors. The workers refused to work, frustrated by the continued neglect and mistreatment of black workers with unequal pay and midnight shifts.
The impact of religion on the protesters was strong. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. participated in the strike just before his assassination and was always seen to be a spiritual figure of faith, justice, and peace. Also, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference helped organize both the strike and the protest, staying to support when Dr. King left Memphis.
King was an integral part of this strike and even returned to Memphis to ensure that a nonviolent solution to this injustice was to succeed. But King was assassinated following a speech that he gave to the workers where he preached about his own mortality and dreams, as well as how he feared that he may not reach the promised land.
Our next historical event for environmental justice is the Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management lawsuit of 1979. This lawsuit came into fruition whenever African American homeowners began to fight against a landfill being built near their neighborhoods.
The historically significant part of this example is that the residents of the homes near the proposed landfill in Houston, Texas, formed the Northeast Community Action Group, and their attorney, Linda McKeever Bullard, filed a class action lawsuit against Southwestern Waste Management Incorporated. This lawsuit was the first of its kind to challenge the location of a waste management facility under civil law. Unfortunately, the lawsuit was won by the all-white Southwestern Waste Management, and the landfill was built anyway, despite protests.
No.
This example does not show religious effects on environmental justice decisions, but it does show the impact of socially constructed social norms and racism on the decisions that are made to impact minorities.
Continuing on, our next example of environmental justice is the protests against Warren County, North Carolina PCB landfill in 1982. These protests occurred when a company began to dump PCB oil waste along highways. The state then decided to create a landfill in Warren County, which was a predominantly black community due to redlining.
Protesters mobilized, including members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Reverend Benjamin F. Travis Jr., of the Submission of Racial Justice, and Reverend Joseph Lowry from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This shows the strong religious influence on the protesting that occurred due to the involvement of African American church leaders and how those involved were striving for equality and environmental justice.
Again, despite the protesting and warning of nearby communities, the landfill was built in Warren County. Following the establishment of the landfill, the water supply was contaminated with PCB oil waste.
This issue in Warren County led the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice to publish its 1987 Toxic Wastes and Race Report. This study stated that 3 out of the 5 African Americans live in communities with abandoned toxic waste sites, and 3 of the 5 largest commercial hazardous waste landfills are located in predominantly African American or Latino communities. This religious effort brought forth important statistics to prove the injustice of placing hazardous waste facilities near minority communities. The final historical event that we are going to mention is the Environmental Justice Advisory Council within the Environmental Protection Agency that formed in 1933. That formed in 1993.
This council was incredibly important because it aided in outlining the environmental justice movement for what must be upheld to prevent future injustices and settle those that occurred.
Next in this episode, we are going to dive deeper into some of the modern examples of environmental justice and how cultural and religious influences and opinions affect decisions that are made.
We are going to start with the issue in Flint, Michigan. This was a water contamination issue where the water was not adequately tested and was subsequently contaminated with lead. Political officials knew of the inadequate water testing and not only did nothing to avoid or counteract the possible water contamination, but had all felony charges dropped against them in court.
Many advocates for environmental justice have described the events in Flint as having to do with environmental racism, which is due to the graphics of the area being 54% African American, as opposed to the rest of the state being 14% African American.
Many religious groups met to discuss their concerns of the contaminated water supply, with the Concerned Pastors for Social Action holding a protest and rally against the decisions of political officials, as well as handing out water filters to the public.
The next modern example of environmental justice that we are going to discuss is the Dakota Access Pipeline. This new oil pipeline was set to go through the Standing Rock Native American Reservation, intentionally avoiding the majority white city of Bismarck, North Dakota, to go through the protected reservation lands.
Protesting from the Native American residents of the Standing Rock Reservation ensued. One important aspect of Native American culture is the deep connection and respect for nature. This pipeline would not only cause physical pollution of the resources contained on the reservation, but would also represent spiritual pollution of the Standing Rock's tribe land from the possibility of impure oil contaminating resources and damaging the spiritual relationships that they have with nature.
This spiritual pollution provides a religious reason for protesting, to protect their important spiritual relationships with both nature and their ancestors that would be disrupted in their burial grounds. Unfortunately, despite the protests, the pipeline was built anyway and leaked hundreds of gallons of oil in a single year, contaminating the water supply. This pipeline is still impacting the Standing Rock tribe to this day.
Our next modern example of environmental justice is the Kayenta mine in Black Mesa, Arizona. This is another example of an environmental injustice toward Native Americans. In this example, coal mines were built on heritage sites on the Navajo and Hopi reservations. This is also another example of spiritual pollution.
The presence of the mine decreased the air quality of the reservation land significantly, with the mine workers facing health risks such as eye damage and lung damage, as well as people in the area being exposed to bad air quality. The mines also required a large quantity of water, drawing too much from the Navajo aquifer, negatively affecting the surrounding ecosystems. The mine was placed away from major civilization in big cities, but instead put negative impacts on the Native American population.
The final modern example is the exploratory drilling done in Bristol Bay, Alaska in 2012. This is yet another example of environmental injustices toward Native American tribes on reservation land. This example is well represented in the poem If Oil is Drilled in Bristol Bay by D.G. Nanook Okpik, who is an Alaskan native Inupiaq Inuit.
This poem is from Okpik's poetry collection called Corpse Whale. This poem involves the speaker who is describing the scene as they watch a helicopter complete exploratory drilling in Bristol Bay, which encompasses multiple tribes on reservation land. She speaks on the subject of environmental justice and tries to work through the concept of why this is happening to this beautiful and protected land.
The speaker and Mother Earth are spiritually collided in mind and can sense the destruction that is being caused as the bit of the drill enters the ground. She asks why humans feel the need to prey upon the natural earth, which is why the landscape is being disrupted.
In all of these examples, religion has played a peacekeeping and conflict-resolving role in environmental justice. Religion and culture can be tools for positive social, political, and environmental change to advance justice movements, but can also be used as a tool to deny climate change if it does go against beliefs. We will explore this topic more in our future episodes. Thanks for listening to the Environmental Justice Podcast, and we'll see you next time.